morning, everybody. Happy Monday, and welcome into today's edition of FreightWaves Now. First FreightWaves following the Super Bowl. Anthony, did you stay up late watching the game last night?
I watched just about none of it.
Oh, me too. Me too.
I did see some of the halftime show, though.
There you go.
Watch that.
The best piece to tune into. Well, we're excited to have you back with us for your Monday edition. What are we getting into today?
That's right. So back in here, and today we're getting back in touch with Mike Baudendistel, who's going to talk about the latest CPG trends going on in the world. We'll also have a preview of drive time on our SiriusXM radio show. But first, we have to go to our top story, which goes to the negotiating table. Once again, with new developments around rail unions, our Joanna Marsh has several stories that really kind of dive into the latest trends here. Joanna, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me. Morning.
So let's get right into it, Joanna. We are, of course, now about 2 months since we've seen these rail unions settle their negotiations, and now we're starting to see kind of some of the fruits of their labor come forward. What are they really working on right now? Everything from sick leave to time off to working conditions?
Yeah, so that feels like a long time ago, but the collective bargaining issues and were resolved in December. So they have the collective bargaining agreement, and now they're working, as you mentioned, on the sort of work-life balance issues. So sick leave is one of them. The railroads might be looking at attendance policies. That might be something that they could be looking at, and of course you have ongoing questions about safety issues. Whether there are things that need to be addressed or not, especially in light of the last week's or the recent derailment of the Norfolk Southern train in Ohio. So. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's kind of between sort of at the local level and just kind of between individual unions and the railroad companies.
Now, the last big time that we were chatting about what was going on with the rail unions, Joanna, we were really under the clock. Is there a timeline here that we're looking at?
Not specifically. I mean, the next negotiating round, I think, is actually starting up next year. But so right now they are kind of looking at those work-life balance issues, and it's interesting because I feel like the unions feel like they have a lot of momentum going forward, and so I think, in a way, what happened in December was, I feel like, this is my personal opinion, is that it was kind of like a unifying point, because they enter the negotiations kind of as sort of as a voice, kind of like one voice, and then when the actual labor contract agreements happened, they were done individually. And then, of course, towards the end, with some unions rejecting the tentative agreements, that sort of became, again, sort of like a way to unify them. And so I think going forward, that they feel like they have this momentum now to address these concerns, and they have sort of the public, more of a public eye, I guess, and they have, you have actually mainstream media kind of regularly covering now, like some of the issues that came up with, like CSX last week, in terms of granting having new sick leave arrangements with 4 unions.
So let's zoom in a little bit on the Norfolk Southern issues going on in Ohio right now and kind of what that raises to the forefront of the safety concerns. Obviously, we know that this is an issue that happened, and most derailments happen pretty often, but this has been very substantial in the impacts to the people who live in East Palestine, and we're seeing now downstream effects from EPA investigations being now instated because of this. What are some of those larger downstream effects? And now what is the union fallout from a derailment like this that we're seeing not only affect the workers itself, but also now the surrounding community?
Yeah. So the state and local I'm sorry. So the state and national EPA offices have been involved in the investigation at the onset to ensure air quality in the region and water quality. And so they've always been involved. I have seen which I need to verify with the EPA, but I have seen some reports in the news about, possible other chemicals that might have been released or in the environment right now. And so obviously that's still an ongoing issue and will be for quite some time. I think amongst union members, there has been a concern because of precision scheduled railroading that that there is either a rush to get the mechanical work done and the inspections done, or there might not be enough resources available in terms of like people working to cover certain territory that needs to be inspected. And so I think that kind of adds on to that whole question of is there sufficient workforces available, not just to power, not just to drive the trains, but also to inspect and to have time for those inspections. And then, of course, you have the technology piece added onto it in terms of, how much will technology displace workers, or how much can it complement what workers are doing. And so you have all these they're all kind of culminating, and they kind of gelling and culminating together into sort of this wider issue of what is the role of workers in the railroad, and how much how much responsibility do they have versus technology and that kind of thing, and will there be? I don't want to say sort of a drawdown of PSR, because I think that's kind of there, but like what will happen operationally, what changes will happen, and no one's really sure yet.
So obviously we have to wait for the results of the full investigation to truly determine the cause. But I think that there are some groups who could rally around certain speculative notions around the cause and really use that as a talking point. Are we seeing anyone put forth any speculation on what they think caused the derailment right now and start to use that as a talking point?
Yeah, so I mentioned it a little bit in my article, but not fully. Railroad Workers United, which is an inter-union group, so it's not really, it's a group that has union members, but isn't necessarily, they don't necessarily negotiate with the railroads, and they're kind of cross-craft, so they, so it's not just one type of worker, and there's several types. They actually sort of have released statements sort of on their sort of position on things, kind of looking more into detail about sort of the operational aspects of the incident in terms of where rail cars might have been positioned on the train, because if you have like your hazardous materials cars like in the beginning or the middle and the end, that can actually affect if a derailment happens, that can affect the release of things, looking at the train length. And those are things that that haven't that the National Transportation Safety Board hasn't really put out in terms of, they've been kind of quiet in terms of, saying, what they think the what the root cause might be, other than the overheated bearing, which although actually some people say that's actually, anyway, so the Railroad Workers United have kind of put out like their thoughts on the accident, which to them indicate that maybe perhaps there might have been a better handling of conducting safety checks.
Awesome. Joanna, thanks so much for updating us on this story, and we'll be sure to check in with you. Real quick, before we let you go, we have People Speaking Rail real quick. When does that air?
It airs on Thursdays at I should know this, I don't. I believe at 3. You can ask Mike Baudendistel about it. And I just wanted to clarify with the Railroad Workers United, not so much that people are responsible, but just the way the operations are managed anyway. But that's right. That's another story.
All right, Joanna, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll follow up with you as the story continues to develop.
All right, thanks. Take care.
Right now, we're going to head over to the wall for our first carrier update of the morning.
Happy Monday morning. Welcome to the first carrier update of the morning. I'm Tanner Dehart, joined alongside Donnie Gilbert. And Donnie, today we're looking at fuel prices. What's going on this week?
Yeah, so each Monday we kind of double check in. We do it 3 or 4 times a week. But blue line here, this is retail diesel, green line, wholesale diesel. And over the past few weeks, we've seen a nice decline here, but it's been about a 1 penny per day. Give it a month, that's only 30 cents. We're down to 4.60, but this is the lowest we've been in quite some time. We had a spike up to well over $5 a gallon, and we're starting to see these effects in cities like Chattanooga. I filled up the other day for $3.99 diesel at a truck stop. I saw $3.89 over the weekend. So we're starting to see some of these prices get below that $4 mark. Love to see them below the $3 mark.
Yeah, absolutely, especially at the commercial level. Now, it looks like the green line talking about being that wholesale price, right? What's the lag time between maybe that wholesale price and the price at the pump?
All right, well, that can be obviously depends on how quick that gas station is turning fuel over. You got these big fuel stations, they might be getting one fuel truck a day. So that could be very quick for them. Other stations, I saw a station that was at $4.84 for weeks and weeks and weeks while everybody else was at $4.19, $4.09. Well, they hadn't rebought to get the cheaper price yet. Then again, you keep that price that high, nobody's gonna be buying that diesel. So finally they rebought, and I saw where they dropped their price to $4.19. But like I say, it just depends on how big or how small these stations are. These should be fairly quickly because normally your truck stops are selling a lot of diesel and they're gonna be getting a lot of fuel. Now, what concerned me was this jump back up here in wholesale price. And then, of course, last week, Russia announced they were dropping their capacity by 500,000 gallons a day of crude oil. And that can affect these markets. People ask, hey, we're not buying their oil right now, or we're trying to, stay away from it. And that doesn't matter. We look at the world market for the oil, and it affects the supply and demand of the world market, and it can push these prices up still just a little bit. But when we go to the next chart here and look at the spread's still at $1.50. As long as we're above this $1.10, $1.20 point, this should allow for diesel fuel prices to continue to fall.
Now, looking at this chart and kind of keeping the eyes on the spread, don't large carriers tend to benefit from this spread?
All right, so good points. We've seen a lot of fourth quarter earnings coming out here over the past few weeks. And if you go into these large carriers and look at their fourth quarter earnings, you'll see probably a positive number that they made money off their fuel surcharge. And the reason is because a lot of these on their fuel surcharges, they charge their customer fuel based on the retail, and they buy at the wholesale. So they can be actually earning not really $1.50 because there's still some taxes to be added into that wholesale, but they can actually make money when these fuel prices are higher right now because of this spread. And so, yes, it could be beneficial to the larger companies. Now, the smaller companies that are not buying at the wholesale price, this is really hurting those smaller companies right now, Tanner.
Yeah, and I mean, they're really looking forward to that fuel hopefully continuing to decline, right? Because they're not buying in bulk.
This is one of the second largest expense to a company, diesel fuel. This could push these companies out of business. Yeah. Let's go to the third chart right quick. Check out our NTI. NTI, it's the blue being the 7-day rolling average, the red being the daily. We've seen it drop down to 235. Now, 235 is the lowest I've seen it since we started the NTI. Now, we took some previous history, and went back several years, or a few years with the NTI. So it's not the lowest it's been, but since we started the NTI, this is the lowest I've seen it, and now our average is down to $2.45. These are spot market rates. This is also going to be really hurting those guys that have a large exposure to the spot market. So fuel prices are way up, spot market prices are way down. That could be just a bad storm for these smaller carriers.
Awesome. Donnie, thank you for the update. We'll hand it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
Thanks, guys, for that. It's time for our first check of top stories this morning on FreightWaves.com. Union heads are preparing for battle as they get ready for negotiations with LTL carriers ABF Freight and T-Force Freight. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters said that it would be militant in securing lucrative agreements for its members once labor deals expire this summer. Sean O'Brien, Teamsters General President, said his administration will not make concessions to the freight industry like previous labor deals allowed for. Currently, more than 15,000 members are covered in labor agreements between the Teamsters, ABF, and T-Force. The Port of Corpus Christi finished 2022 with a new tonnage record, reporting a 21% year-over-year increase in tonnage of refined products and a 15% year-over-year increase in tonnage of crude oil. Port leaders said that the continued pressure of the Ukraine-Russia conflict shifted a lot of energy demand to the United States, allowing for Texas ports to take center stage. Prior to the invasion, the Port of Corpus Christi had a 40-40 split between exports to Asia and Europe, with the remaining 20% going to the Americas. Since the conflict started, about 65% of its exports are now going to Europe, with about 20 to 25% to Asia. And trucking nonprofit St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund announced that it is bringing back its Highway to Hope benefit concert to raise funds for its driver-focused philanthropy. The first concert took place virtually in May of 2021 and raised over $75,000 for the fund, with the hope of headliner Winona Judd and other big-name country artists. This year's concert will happen on April 22nd in Knoxville, Tennessee, and is headlined by Levi Human. For these headlines and more, log on to FreightWaves.com. And if you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated. Head on over to tv.freightwaves.com or log into our FreightWaves app for anything else that you might need from us. Right now, we're going to take a quick break. We'll get to a check of weather when we come back, so don't go away. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
From the truckload quoting page within TIE-TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TIE-TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our first check of the weather this morning. Getting things started with a pretty deep winter storm coming across the western half of the United States, bringing some intense snowfall rates really all the way from the U.S.-Canada border down into the southern parts of the Mountain West to northern New Mexico and Arizona. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. We're going to kind of talk about this in a couple different pieces today. So the first piece, we're going to focus in on that Mountain West, the Four Corners area from Colorado into Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and up into Kansas as well. We've got winter storm warnings and winter storm watches in place throughout the mountains of Colorado and then down into the northern mountains of New Mexico. Same thing, winter storm warnings all across Arizona. That does include the I-40 corridor moving through Flagstaff and I-17 moving down towards the Phoenix area. And then up into Utah, I-15 and 70, both included in those winter storm watches for today and into tomorrow. We're going to be expecting a pretty decent amount of snowfall to set up, and a lot of this could be heavy to even blizzard conditions at times. We've got some strong winds coming behind it as well. Overall, our total snowfall forecast, let's go ahead and turn that on right now. We're looking at a pretty decent amount, most of that centered around that southern central Colorado area, but that is going to include some pretty heavy amounts for the I-25 corridor moving through northern New Mexico as well. Highest snowfall amount's going to be up in those mountain peaks, looking at about 2 feet in some spots. Our interstate corridor is going to be settling between about 6 to 10 inches in some spots as well, so that can make driving conditions pretty dangerous out there for the next few days. Same thing, coupled that with the high winds, some blizzard conditions will exist on the I-40 corridor from Albuquerque through the Arizona border into Flagstaff. So drivers out there across the Mountain West just need to be careful here for the next few days. Really not looking at a whole lot just outside of that concentrated area, but if you take a look further up to the north, that's going to be their next hit of winter weather, which we'll talk about coming up a little bit later. Right now, we're going to toss things back over to Isaiah Buchanan. He's got our first check of what's trending on social media this morning. Something tells me it has to do with a football game and maybe a Rihanna concert. I don't know. Let's check it out.
Kaylee, your intuition is on point. Of course, we're talking about the Super Bowl this morning. Welcome into Social Roundabout, everybody. My name is Isaiah Buchanan. And last night, the 2 number 1 seeds in the NFL, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, played in the biggest stage of them all, the Super Bowl. And the Philadelphia Eagles fell to the Kansas City Chiefs, 38-35. This was the game-winning kick right here by kicker Harrison Butker. It was a chip shot. It was shorter than a PAT, and it left very little time on the clock for the Eagles, about 8 seconds to try to get a score, get within scoring range to tie the game, and they were unable to do it. So congratulations to Patrick Mahomes and the rest of the Chiefs. It was a very emotional night for all of their players. I mean, some of them had their kids out on the field, and they were making little confetti angels. A lot of other players, including Jarrett McKinnon, running back. It was a very emotional night for him, getting his first Super Bowl win. So, you know, it's just really cool to see a lot of the players get so emotional like they do, because it means so much to them to win on the biggest stage. I mean, look at them embracing their teammate right there as he is just taking it all in, that he is a Super Bowl champion. Now, I will say that the game, there was a favorable call that maybe went in the Chiefs' favor. We won't go too deep into that, but nonetheless, the Chiefs did play very well in the second half. You can't keep Mahomes magic down, because he is just going to perform. I mean, he is that guy. That was a I'm him type of performance out of Patrick Mahomes in that second half, and trying to get Kelsey back involved in the second half as well. So just want to give a shout out to the Kansas City Chiefs as they get their second Super Bowl in 4 years. I believe they won in 2020. So congratulations to them. And we're going to be talking about Rihanna's halftime performance in our next hit, talking about some of the memes that came along with that. But right now, I'm going to toss things back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
Isaiah, thank you for that. We'll catch up with you a little bit later. Right now, we're going to take a check of the freight conversation from last week. It was so good with Ryan Schreiber that we had to show you it again this morning. So let's go ahead and take a look.
Welcome in again to our freight conversation. And this week we have a great guest to look forward to some great answers with. Ryan Schreiber joining us from Metaphora, joining us on location. Ryan, how you doing?
I usually am joining from location, yeah. So, but this location, beautiful Las Vegas. So, I'm down a lot. I don't know. At some point, somebody might come and grab me and try and break my kneecaps. But otherwise, so if that happens, maybe cut that out in post. But otherwise, I'm doing pretty well. Thanks, man. Good to see you again.
Oh, I'm keeping that in there. Absolutely. Let's go ahead here. Obviously. Yeah. So last week, excuse me, we had Ann Rinke on, president of TIA, and you know how this works. So she posed an idea, and here's what she said.
Well, I think a couple things. So we talk about the security of freight. We talk about collaborating on freight. we have some bad actors in our freight space that are frauds or commit fraud or are committing double brokering or committing, they're dispatch agents who are essentially brokering freight. And will the railroads care? No, probably not. But certainly the carriers will care and the shippers will care about how we can actually improve that. We have a regulatory agency that's constraining its resources, and they think in its authority to regulate that space because these are commercial events, not safety events. We would argue that these actually are safety and security events. We had a member who arranged transportation for a load of meat 2 weeks ago. Turned out it was to a fraudulent carrier who gave it to a dispatch service out of some other country. Long story short, we don't know where this meat is. So my point is there is fraud in that market. How can we figure out in the marketplace, how can we figure out ways if we can't get FMCSA because of constrained resources to be engaged, what can we do together to collaborate? And I think there's interest there. Certainly we've talked to some in the owner operator space. I think there's some interest there of how do we actually work together to figure out solutions.
So with that, bad actors at play, how do you deal with it? Big question. What's your take?
It's interesting. It's something that I'm actually super, super passionate about. So as you know, as most people know, my background is as an attorney. Like I don't practice, but it's something I'm really passionate about. So in the industry, carrier compliance and onboarding and monitoring carriers, et cetera, is really, really important. And everything that Ann said is true, right? We have major issues at the legislative level, at the administrative agency level with the DOT, the FMCSA, and Congress. Funding is an issue, et cetera. So, we're not going to solve fragmentation. So, let's kind of take some of the things off the table. Sure. If there was consolidation, that would be helpful, but it's not going to go that way. Additionally, the FMCSA is not likely to get additional funding in ways that would allow technology to solve the problem directly. So there systemically is not going to be major change that's going to save the day. So realistically, as you kind of look at the ecosystem that we have, right, where we are, the players that we have involved, et cetera, we need to really consider how we're leveraging data to make better decisions at the organizational level. And I think there's a couple of ways in which we need to think about that. Number one, what's going to be really, really important is, and this is starting to happen. I'm glad it's starting to happen because for the longest time it wasn't happening, but companies are thinking differently about data and understanding that all data is not created equal, right, Bill? Like some data has much more value to you by keeping it hidden, and other data points are much more valuable when they're exposed to the market and they can be anonymized and aggregated and we can learn from them, right? So there's a couple of those things that are in play. So number one, that trend needs to continue and accelerate. We need trucking companies, we need brokerages to be able to contribute data to products, to consortiums, to whatever it might be that's going to help us track and identify carriers and bad actors, right? And so that's going to be really, really important, because what that'll allow us then to do is to apply next generation technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence to identify patterns that we can then leverage to make better decisions and the like. And so it becomes less of an issue of, kind of figure it out within the four walls of your business, and a little bit more collaborative, but not collaborative, right, in a I don't get without giving, or kind of pure altruism. Like it's going to be, it's also not going to be like a band all together and like create a coalition to fight. It's just that's not how people act and operate. And so, there's technology right now that's working on solving this problem. Carrier 411 had tools that were really valuable. That product hasn't kind of evolved over time. RMIS, same concept. So you're seeing entrants come into that market that are trying to work on this problem. You have Carrier Assure by Cassandra Gaines. You have Highway with Jordan Graft that are working on taking a lot of this information in and then not just presenting it to a user, but but creating an environment where you're assisting folks in making better decisions by synthesizing that data and being able to do it. So I think that it is a great question. It's something I'm very passionate about. It's an incredibly complicated problem to solve, but it absolutely has to start with data, and it has to start with assisting the users in making those better choices, not tasking them with deciding, to read a Freight Guard report and then make a choice.
All right. Well, Ryan, time now for you to kind of direct the conversation whichever way you want to take it. Let's say you're in a room with everybody in freight. You are at the podium. Where would you like the conversation to go?
Well, you and I covered a lot. So, as we often
yes, but we also scratched the surface too. I mean, there's a whole lot more we didn't talk about.
I would really love to. I'm going to go back to talking about autonomous vehicles because I don't think that we talk about it enough. I think that often the conversation around autonomous vehicles just centers on sort of extremes of the conversation. Oh, they're going to take everybody's jobs, like it's right around the corner, or it's never going to happen. And so I think there's a middle, right? And I find myself in the middle, which is I'm bullish on it. I think it's really important, and I think we need to figure it out. And also, there are very real challenges to where it is today. So I'd love the next person to start by talking about, what, starting from kind of like a growth mindset perspective of, okay, everything's a problem to solve. Like, what are some of the major problems that we need to solve for right now that can help make meaningful progress on autonomy, not from a technological perspective, because the technology is pretty good, not from a technology perspective, but from a change management perspective. What do we need to do to change people's behavior? How do we change people's behavior? How do we change people's thought process around autonomous vehicles to drive a better, safer environment on the road for the professional drivers, and to protect the professional drivers from four-wheelers who are trying to kill themselves and kill other people. So I'd love to hear somebody talk a little bit more about that, because I think that conversation could use some more attention.
Ryan Schreiber of Metaphora, thanks so much for joining us on our Freight Conversation.
Thanks always for having me, Bill.
And of course, you can catch the rest of the Freight Conversation with Ryan Schreiber up on our YouTube channel, and every other piece of the Freight Conversation that has aired so far you can find there as well. We continue the Freight Conversation this Thursday with a brand new edition, so make sure that you're tuning in then. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now and Mike Baudendistel in just a few minutes.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how Tie TMS can optimize your quoting process.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, Enterprise Trucking Carrier Expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
Welcome into another carrier update. Donnie, we're looking at some reefer. What's going on this week?
Yeah, so bringing up some of our reefer data here. I'm looking at outbound tender volumes in blue, and in yellow, I've got our rejection rates. So we've seen it just over the past few days start to pick back up just a little bit. Not enough that's a real huge change in our volumes, but at least it kind of stopped this downward decline that we've been seeing throughout the latter part of January and early February. Rejection rates also were in a decline, and they bottomed out here, right around about 4.5%. They've come back up just a little bit as well to 4.73. So we might have seen just a little bit of tightening in the reefer market. Is it going to push the spot rates back up? Probably not, but we will look at a few markets in our lanes of the day. So we saw volumes pick up a little bit. We saw our rejection rates pick up just a little bit. Now let's go to the next chart here, and we're going to look at reefer outbound tender lead times. Now we're looking at the shippers side. What are they feeling? Are they feeling like, are things tightening up on their side? Well, we saw here over the last few days, outbound tender lead times get extended just a little bit as well. So it looks like with the increase in volumes, the increase in rejection rates, and the increase here with a little bit of in the outbound tender lead times, that there was a little bit of a tightening that happened throughout the market probably over the weekend.
Now, even with lead times at about almost 4.5 days, that still seems pretty high compared to historical.
All right, so I tried to pull this back out. Now, when you look at historical, dry vans are about 2.5, 2.6. You look at the OTLT, which is all together, shows about 3 days. When you break it down to reefer here, you can really kind of go back here and look, this is kind of the norm right around that 4.4 to 4.2 days. So I like to pull it out so you can see kind of where the norm is, and we're just a little bit high. And you go 0.2, 0.3, you're a few hours, and I like to use this chart right here to compare to our markets. So if you were to break this down, ROTLT.MEM for Memphis, or CHA for Chattanooga, and compare that to see does the Memphis market have tender lead times further extended than the average, or does the Atlanta market have reefer tender lead times extended further or maybe less than the average, to kind of give a good comparison so that you kind of realize what's going on, because these are important, but you got to kind of know where you are and know how to watch them. And as I say, when you see them tighten up here just a little bit, that can be a sign that shippers are having some issues. Right back here, this is our little snowstorm that covered the country. That could cause a little bit of extension because trucks didn't make it in to pick up that day. Now they have double the freight to get out on Monday. All right, let's go one more chart here forward. We're going to look at the reefer outbound tender rejection rates, but it's the 1 week change. We're looking at technically yesterday versus 1 week before, and what markets have either increased or decreased in reefer tender rejection rates. And this is just a good feel because a lot of times you don't see a lot of fluctuation in the reefer rejection rate, especially when they're so low right now. But some markets may have some increases, some markets are decreasing, and it may kind of balance that out. So we kind of go through here, we see Savannah, some reefer rejection rates are increasing in Savannah, down here, South Carolina as well. A little bit up here in Allentown, PA. Holding steady here in the main market, Chicago, drop some in Indianapolis, a little bit higher there in Atlanta. So no real big changes. You know, you see a lot more blue here, the Memphis, Atlanta, and, you know, kind of here in the Southeast. These are going to be some of the ones that I check out here. And those where the changes are. Here in the poultry belt, looks like reefer rejection rates are declining. So not good for those areas, but you can kind of get a good idea where they are increasing. When we come back next time, Tanner, we'll bring up another map as well to kind of help us out, the reefer head haul map to see where maybe you want to see your trucks.
Awesome. Thanks, Donnie. We'll send it back over to Anthony and Kaylee.
All right, thanks guys for that carrier update. It's time now for our daily communities check-in, and it's Monday, so we are talking to Mike Baudendistel all about the stockout and what's up in the CPG space. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Sure, no problem. That was a nice graphic. I haven't seen that one before.
It looks great. I love it. Our graphics team here at FreightWaves is awesome, and the intros are on point. So big shout out to them. Let's dig a little bit into what's going on in the stockout. We've got the show this afternoon and our newsletter, of course, launching twice weekly. And today we're talking a little bit about USDA and school lunch regulations. How does this all tie into CPG?
Yeah, so I think this will impact CPG companies that sell into the food service space, and sort of the aspect of CPG that I find just the most natural interest in is those topics related to health and fitness, and so I like to talk about those things in the newsletter when they arise. And I thought this was pretty interesting last week. So the USDA is going to regulate school lunches. They're going to regulate sugar in school lunches for the first time on a national level. You sort of go back to the Obama administration, and they had regulations on fats, including taking trans fats out. And it really ended up being counterproductive because the food company just put in more sugar to make the taste the way that they wanted it to taste. But now, so the new sugar limits say they can't be more than 10% of the calories per meal starting in 2025. Then the sodium limits get stepped down 10% from where they are now, and then have to get stepped down another 10%, another year out. And then the grains, 80% of the grains have to be whole grains, and then there may be regulations, pending on flavored milk. They may not be allowed until either the 5th grade or 8th grade. So all these things, they sound like good regulations. Of course, there's always pushback from the industry and these trade groups that represent the food companies. I mean, some say it's unrealistic that they're going to source that many whole grains. Some say that children won't eat the meals at school if they won't taste good. They'll either bring something from home that tastes better, or they'll just wait until 3 p.m. and go home and eat at home. They said milk lobby says, well, this is just taking away choice that they should have. And then some say, well, these meals that these kids get at school are some of the healthiest meals they get, which may be sad commentary on parenting. But in any event, I suspect that the pushback comes from the fact that these unhealthier foods are cheaper to produce, and these companies don't think they're going to get compensated commensurately with the additional cost it takes to change their supply chain, get these, healthier foods into the lunchrooms, that there's just revenue is just going to increase. There's sort of with inflation, the kind of the way it typically would. And all these things I think is just part of a bigger push, really around the world, related to CPG, around health, particularly around sugar. I mean, there's been this big change in, what the FDA can defines as healthy, either implied as healthy or, expressly that a company can say, is healthy, it has to have certain, positive, nutrients in addition to not having some of these bad things. And in the UK, there was this big regulation change for what they call HFSS, sort of high fat and sugar and salt content. And in the UK, they have these labels now. There's sort of the red, green, yellow, sort of stoplight type labels, so you can easily see how much sugar, sodium is in a particular food product. And then what I liked about what they did is they actually took the retailer into account in the UK. And now they say that they can't have these end of aisle displays or have junk food at the checkout counter because that causes more impulse purchases. And Mondelez said, I mean, that they're seeing fewer impulse purchases of their products because of some of these changes. So it does seem to be having a little bit of an effect. I would like to see more done as far as the U.S. big box retailers. I think the issue is you go to Costco and you get these huge tubs of M&Ms, and just having more junk food in your house causes you to eat more junk food. I don't think it's the fact that you gave your kid a candy bar at the checkout counter. There's just one candy bar. I think it's more the quantity than whether you eat these things at all.
The serving size and not necessarily the content of the foods. I think the school lunch argument is super interesting because, of course, we know that during the Obama administration, Michelle Obama had a very big campaign on healthifying school lunches, and that was kind of her flagship program, right? Was making sure that these nutrition standards were really up to par for kids, and those regulations and those administration decisions have kind of carried over recently. Did we see any type of big impact to CPG companies when that initially went into place? And now with these new USDA regulations, are you talking about even more stringency than what we saw during the Obama era, or was it kind of rolled back and now looking to put it back into place?
Yeah, I wasn't following CPG industry closely at that time. I know they had to take a lot of those products out of vending machines and things like that. So you would think that would have an impact on those companies. So not being able to sell a lot of those products. But it seems like probably like the companies that are most concerned about this would either be the ones that do the milk where those will be lower margin milk products, or that just sort of sell into food service in general, just having to change out all of their supply chains to make them healthier.
And Mike, it's been many years since I was in school, but back then there were school stores, and you could skip lunch altogether and just buy snacks from stores and things like that on campus. I know my school is probably in the minority in that, but do you think that this would get impacted by any of this potential regulation at all, that you would limit not just vending machines, but also what types of food are going to be sold on campus?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that was impacted by the Obama administration rules, where they were doing things like removing vending machines, not allowing the sugary sodas, not allowing a lot of the packaged snacks, most of which are made by Frito-Lay and Pepsi. So I think it could impact those things as well. But I mean, if those stores weren't available, would you just bring them from home and keep them in your backpack?
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to watch for sure, and going to be interesting to see how this continues to develop. Let's talk a little bit about Stock Out. We've got the show today and the newsletter this week. What's coming up on the show this afternoon?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to talk about just with companies starting to report earnings. I saw Treehouse just reported. I mean, that usually gives you a pretty good handle on whether private label companies are taking share from the national brand. I mean, Treehouse makes all these private label food products for companies like Aldi, Trader Joe's. So that gives you a pretty good sense. And then Nestle either reported or is about to report, and they're the biggest company in the space, and they've done really well with a lot of their initiatives to move into more premium products. So that'll give you a sense of whether some of the higher income consumers are maybe cutting back. I mean, they just said the other week that they still have some room to go in terms of getting sort of really being made whole from the higher costs that they've incurred. So it'd be interesting to see if they, talk about that again, that they expect to see higher on-shelf prices. I mean, there's this big disconnect right now between what the grocers want in terms of price and what the CPG companies want. CPG companies say, well, their prices are still rising, maybe not as quickly as they were, but they still want higher prices.
And when we're looking in the CPG space, Mike, a little bit of a random question here, but do you see any kind of trend moving into suggested serving sizes instead of actually making any foods healthier? Has that been a conversation at all?
I haven't heard anything like that. But that's part of the thing that needs to be taken into account with a lot of these labeling requirements, like the stoplight like labeling requirement that they have in the UK is you have a big red label if it's high in sugar, but it's based on how much the serving size is. So if the serving size is small enough, I guess you potentially could qualify for a green label, even if something is high in sugar and no one ever eats one serving size. So that is something that needs to be taken into account.
All right, Mike, well, thank you for joining us this morning. And of course, we'll catch the stock out this afternoon. Folks can go subscribe to your newsletter as well if they want more.
Okay, good to see you guys.
Good to see you as well, Mike. Right now, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
From the truckload quoting page within TIE-TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TIE-TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our second check of the weather for your Monday morning. We are looking at a pretty decent and really honestly impressive severe weather setup getting ready to impact the southern parts of the plains all the way from Wednesday on into Thursday of this week. And I call it a decent severe weather setup because we're still in February. This is still technically winter, right? So we're not typically used to seeing these types of really impressive setups this early in the year. Normally they're reserved for that kind of middle spring, the April to mid-May area, but we're looking at a pretty decent chance of severe weather, strong winds, thunderstorms, flooding, rain, and tornadoes with large hail possibly coming for your Wednesday. Let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. We've got a day 3 slight risk issued by the Storm Prediction Center right now. This does reach just to the east of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metro, all the way up that I-30 corridor up through the Texarkana area into Arkansas and then West Tennessee into Western Kentucky as well. And with this, as I mentioned, multiple modes of severe weather are going to be possible, but there is a pretty significant tornado threat coming out of this setup for this week. So your day 3 outlook, this is slight right now, but we have the potential for it to ramp up as we move throughout the next few days. Going to be a Wednesday looking impact for these storms. And folks all along this area need to be sure that they have at least their severe weather plans in place for what happens if a severe thunderstorm or a tornado comes towards that area. Memphis is well going to be the biggest population center included in this slight outlook. They are going to expect to see possibly some more linear storms out of this. That's what typically happens is you have those storms form that line by the time that they hit that West Tennessee area. But everywhere from Dallas through central Arkansas needs to be prepared for supercell thunderstorms as well. That setup going to come from the winter storm setting up across the Four Corners as the cold front drapes across and kicks off some of that thunderstorm activity. Before that, expect to see some high winds here throughout the next few days. So Monday into Tuesday, sustained wind gusts going to be between about 15 to 20, and then your wind gusts upwards of 35 to 40 miles an hour in front of that storm. That's it for this look at weather. We will continue talking about weather later on in the show through your second hour. We're going to toss things back over to Isaiah now for another update on last night's Super Bowl.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. My name is Isaiah Buchanan. Let's talk about the big event last night. No, I'm not talking about the Super Bowl. I'm talking about the halftime show. If you look at Google Trends this morning, Rihanna had more than 10+ million searches on Google Trends. The next closest was the Super Bowl, but it had less than 2 million searches. So obviously people were more entertained with Rihanna's halftime show than they were with the game. And I'm gonna say, Rihanna looked fantastic last night. She had on this all red, and I'm not just saying that because I hope Rihanna sees this and maybe gives me a call. No, I'm just playing. But I'm not the only one who thought she looked great. Elmo also thought Rihanna looked really good. He said, Elmo thinks you look great in red, Miss Rihanna, just like Elmo. So, hey, I'm not the only one that's thinking it. But let's go on to the real performers of the night. How about the interpreter for Rihanna? Take a look at this video. She goes into depth. I think she might have gone more viral than Rihanna did. I mean, look at the dance moves she's putting on while she's signing this song for people. I mean, that's impressive. I mean, interpreters, I've seen some interpreters do some really great dancing, but this right here probably has to take the cake. I mean, she's getting into it. That's impressive. Now I want to show you another thing from her halftime show. Rihanna had a lot of these backup dancers that were dressed in like these white coats and white pants. And at one point they were running out onto the field, and that's become a meme that people are really using a lot now. And here is one of them. It says, FAA, we're issuing an airspace closure due to national security risk. And then it shows the balloons, and it has the backup dancers running out with their hands up. And a couple of other ones that we've seen are talking about white blood cells in the body on their way to fight an infection, which was a really funny one that gave me a good laugh. But now I want to talk about what also was really impressive. Rihanna's performance was really impressive, but so was the breakdown of the set that she was on. Take a look at this video. So they had all of these people working to get this set broken down, and they got it down in 4 minutes. So I just want to give a huge shout out. This video is sped up, of course, but I mean, you can see how many people are working because they have a very short amount of time to get this set off the field so that they can play the second half of the Super Bowl. So really want to give a huge shout out to the production crew and all the work that they did to put on such a great performance last night with Rihanna. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. Coming up in the next set, we're going to talk about some of the best and worst commercials of the Super Bowl. But right now, I'm going to toss things back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
Gotta say, Anthony, you want to talk about some streamlined logistics? The people who set up and break down the sets of the Super Bowl.
That was very impressive. Also, looking at that set, when I first saw it, it definitely did remind me of a Mario stage, and I did see that on Twitter, so definitely full of entertainment. And coming up, we're gonna have the Super Bowl of virtual events.
Oh, absolutely. Can't promise you, Rihanna, can't promise you a good football game, but we can promise you some door prizes if you get signed up for our Global Supply Chain Week. That's coming up next week here on FreightWaves. That'll be Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. All you have to do is head on over to live.freightwaves.com. And for way less than the price of a Super Bowl ticket, yes, free,
absolutely free,
you get the chance to win some prizes.
That's right, and you still have time to get registered, and it's going to be a great thing if you do, because going here to this virtual event and get you a lot of networking that will get you ready for our in-person events, which are going to be amazing as well.
Absolutely. So head on over to live.freightwaves.com, grab our full event schedule, everything from Global Supply Chain Week all the way to the Future Freight Festival here in Chattanooga, Tennessee next November. We're going to take a look at the last 24 hours in freight with our market update, and then we'll take a quick break and be right back.
To an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
From the truckload quoting page within TIE-TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TIE-TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now, starting off your 10 a.m. hour with a check of your top stories this morning. The Port of Corpus Christi finished 2022 with a new tonnage record, reporting a 21% year-over-year increase in tonnage of refined products and a 15% year-over-year increase in tonnage of crude oil. Port leaders said that the continued pressure of the Ukraine-Russia conflict shifted a lot of energy demand to the United States, allowing for Texas ports to take center stage. Prior to the invasion, the port of Corpus Christi had a 40-40 split between exports to Asia and Europe, with the remaining 20% going to the Americas. Since the conflict started, about 65% of its exports are now going to Europe, with about 20% and 25% to Asia. Trucking nonprofit St. Christopher Truckers Relief Fund announced it is bringing back its Highway to Hope benefit concert to raise funds for its driver-focused philanthropy. The first concert took place virtually in May of 2021, raised over $75,000 for the fund with the help of headliner Winona Judd and other big-name country artists. This year's concert will happen on April 22nd in Knoxville, Tennessee, and is headlined by Levi Human. The U.S. Postal Service announced it is proposing a merger between 3 ground delivery products into a new brand called USPS Ground Advantage, which will offer 2 to 5 day transit times with pound and cubic pricing options for parcels weighing up to 70 pounds. The 3 products in the proposed merger are the First Class Package Service, the Parcel Select Ground Service, and the Parcel Select Ground Cubic Service. The agency said it plans to unveil the full offering after it is approved by the Postal Regulatory Commission. Operating results from 4 Asian shipping lines show the companies are still suffering from performance declines and ongoing market erosion into this year. OOCL reported revenue of $3.18 billion for the fourth quarter, down 35% year over year, with volumes down 2.7%. Revenue on Trans-Pacific lanes was one of the main drivers of the steep plunge. Evergreen, Yang Ming, and Wanhai also saw revenue declines for both the quarter and for the first month of 2023. Yang Ming reported operating revenues down 22% in January from December. And while Cummins may not be breaking even on its new power division quite yet, the forecast is strong for production of hydrogen electrolyzer technology. That technology is crucial to making hydrogen fuel for zero-emissions long-haul trucking. The market for its forecasts grow over the next decade to $120 billion by 2023. CEO Jennifer Rumsey said the electrolyzer business is expected to drive the majority of the progress towards break-even in 2027 for the new power division, with Cummins projecting $400 million in hydrogen revenue by 2025. And for those headlines and more, you can log on to FreightWaves.com. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, and head on over to tv.freightwaves.com for anything else that you might need. We're going to toss things back over to Tanner and Donnie for our next look at our carrier update.
Thanks for joining us for another carrier update. Now we're going to take a look at what's going on in the refrigerated markets. Donnie, what are we looking at?
So I'm going to start off here looking at the head haul, or it's the head haul index, but I have it broken down by reefer. Now what that index is basically we look at all the outbound tenders that are coming in for a market, and then we subtract out all the inbound tenders. So we kind of get a way of how that market is in terms of kind of capacity. Now, we're not taking into any kind of effective deadhead, but when I see a light blue or a blue, I know that there's more outbound freight in that market than there is freight coming into that market. When I see a red, I know there's more inbound trucks going into that market than there is outbound freight, which could be very dangerous. You get into a red market, either one, freight's going to be really cheap coming out, or 2, you may have to lay over a day or a day and a half, depending on what time you get there. So red markets can be dangerous, but going blue to red might pay a lot more. Going red to blue might pay a very low price because you're getting put back into a market that could have tighter conditions, more opportunities for those carriers. So we say run to the blue. So I like to look at this map here for dry van and reefer, and kind of, if you're those larger carriers that right now it's probably more important to keep your drivers moving. You don't want them to be sitting. When they start sitting, they start calling, they start getting upset. We kind of laugh about, if your driver's sitting there and a recruiter from another company pulls in and parks, $5,000 bonus written real big on the side of his trailer, you may lose a driver right then and there because he was basically bored sitting around and he had time to dial that phone number on the side of that trailer. So you don't want that happening. Run to the blue. You have better opportunities to keep your drivers moving by running into these markets than you do if you're running into a market that is underbooked.
Now, Donnie, could you make a little bit more money looking at this, saying, okay, well, hey, if you're telling me if I want to make the most of my money, I kind of need to, or most run efficiently want to stay in the blues, but could you technically maybe go to a red market that's right next to a blue market?
All right, so yes, the answer to that is yes. If you're going to a red market, you need to price accordingly. So if you're going to a red market that's beside a blue market, you're probably got the deadhead from that red market to that blue market, which is going to cost you money. You need to have that in that first price to cover those expenses. So the answer to that, you know, if you're going to go down to Florida, there's nothing wrong with going to Florida. You may wait a day. It might be very cheap coming out. But if you got the right price going in, then there's no problem with that. So what they say, there's nothing wrong with any type of freight lane. It's just the pricing or whatever, the old joke that goes around. It's just how much you charge. Let's pop in here and look at another market here right quick. We're looking at Harrisburg, PA. We saw that pop up on here up in the Northeast. Well, we see that volumes are increasing in this market. So we see that it was a blue. This might be one that you might consider. Rejection rates for this market are at 5.21%, so a little bit above the average. Now, the problem I have with Harrisburg is Harrisburg is on that belt. It feeds the Northeast. So when you get into Harrisburg, it's like quicksand. Every load that you find coming out of Harrisburg that's being posted up is probably delivering into the Northeast, and it's hard to get out. To get out, a lot of times you'll see a very, very cheap load. But look it up. Next one here right quick, last one we'll look at Chicago. Chicago is on the head haul map, still looks pretty good. Rejection rates are very low at 3.40%, but volumes here kind of picked back up here the last couple of days. So keep an eye on Chicago as well, and we'll run some of these through the lanes today.
Awesome. Thank you, Donnie. We'll hand it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, guys, thank you for that carrier update. We'll get one more before we are done here for the day on FreightWaves Now. Right now, we're going to welcome in our next live guest. We've got our editorial director, Rachel Premack, with us to talk about another very interesting piece of consumer product that is a leading economic indicator. Rachel, talk to us a little bit about why cheaper beer could tell us how the economy is doing.
Yeah, so what's going on right now is that beer demand overall is below what it was at this time last year, and it's actually in December of 2022, we saw the lowest volume of beer shipments to wholesalers since 2012. So as a whole, we're seeing beer demand way down, but there is one sector of the beer industry that is actually seeing increased interest, and that is the sub-premium category. So that includes Natural Light or Natty Light. Does anyone say Natural Light? I don't know. Kind of those, yeah, it's kind of those beers that are a little bit more, kind of taste more like water than beer, actually. So those beers are seeing higher demand than they were at this time last year. And it really resembles that people are cutting down on their beer budgets, their beer spending, as the prices of beer go up.
So, Rachel, this is so anecdotal, but here in Chattanooga, we've got a bar called Mike's Hole in the Wall, and Mondays aren't Mike's Mondays, it's $1 Natty Light night. So like this, it makes sense that we're talking about this story on a Mike's Monday, right? But I think that this is so fascinating, especially when you put it in terms of the fact that normally you would see beer sales increase right now, right? People are coming out of dry January, you have the Super Bowl happening typically the first 2 weeks in February. So this kind of shows us that discretionary spending on CPG goods, on food and beverage, is now going away and going down, and that's, if people are choosing to sacrifice on their beer, they must be hurting in their pockets, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it is notable that this data is referring to December and January. We don't know quite yet what's going on in February, but it's interesting because we're seeing budgets increase in another sector, which is hard liquor. In 2022, spirits actually officially gained more market share than beer. This is the first time on record that we've seen more spirits purchasing than beer purchasing in the U.S. And the part of the hard liquor market that's seeing the most attention is actually high-priced imports, especially tequila and mezcal, pricier. I'm thinking of what is it? The George Clooney brand, Casamigos, like kind of that like mid to high shelf tequila and mezcal is seeing a lot of attention. So people are spending more on alcohol, but they're spending more on this sort of top shelf, middle shelf brand. So even though we're kind of seeing the market go into two camps. There's the low price beer camp, and then there's the high price spirits camp. And the middle is kind of clearing out, and we're going to two different directions.
And Rachel, really, a lot of times when we look at consumer demand and consumers trading down, sometimes they just go down one level to a mid-tier product potentially. Are we seeing any of that happening with beer, or are folks just saying, you know what, let's just go to the lowest tier that we can?
Yeah, so a different part of the canned alcohol industry, you could say, that's getting a lot of attention, seeing a lot of growth, is the ready-to-drink spirits. And that's kind of just canned cocktails. You can get a canned espresso martini or a canned margarita. That's seeing a lot of growth. Those do tend to be more expensive than premium or sub-premium beers. But that is one kind of part of the canned liquor economy that is getting more attention. But yeah, we're seeing things like craft or premium lights or imports. All of those are seeing less and less purchasing, at least in January of this year compared to January of the year before.
When you talk about now this consumer shift from premium or like mid-tier, oftentimes it talks about a shift away from local breweries and local small businesses as well. Do we see any of that impacting their data as well? Some of these companies who are maybe really suffering now because people are choosing to go for the national brands that are cheap, $18 for like an 18-pack, I think, of Natty Light, right, at like your Walmart, whereas you would pay $12 for a 4-pack of a local brew?
Yeah, so the beer economists and experts who I spoke to said that craft beer is here to stay. It's definitely not going away. It's a solid part of the beer industry, but the problem is that they're not really getting a lot of new purchasers, a lot of new customers. But the people who are loyal to it, they're going to keep buying. They're big fans. They'll stick around. But the issue is getting those new consumers in, and that affects kind of their performance at at your big box retailers, because those retailers are going to prioritize products that can turn around really quickly, high velocity. So if that local craft IPA, it has a big following, or a dedicated following, but not necessarily a big following, they might prioritize putting a national brand or an imported spirits on that shelf instead of that small dedicated cult following type of craft brew.
And Rachel, were you seeing any trends, or did you see anything about different units being purchased? So instead of maybe buying a larger case, you downsize in case, or maybe you get a 6-pack instead of a 12 or anything like that?
Yeah, that was one of the most kind of interesting trends in this piece, is that we're seeing increased activity in those smaller sort of unit purchases. So instead of buying a 30-pack, people are more likely to buy a 12-pack. There's even been an increase in people buying individual cans or individual bottles. And all of that really indicates that people who are interested in drinking beer will find a way to drink beer, but it will just perhaps be a smaller unit or a more low-cost option than they might have purchased before.
So now we've talked about boxes, we've talked about bubble wrap, and we've talked about beer. Any other interesting things that you're looking at to be some new leading economic indicators?
For the next few weeks, I'm going to go back on my, the classic freight topics, but I have had fun kind of looking into these more, I guess, not distant parts, but sort of the areas of the economy I don't normally look at. But I've been neglecting the trucking industry, so I'm going to be back to writing about that for a little while.
We've definitely enjoyed your coverage on this, Rachel. And I mean, you can't sell yourself short, because when you're looking at these indicators, they do have impacts on the freight market, because it all goes back to the consumer, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So if you're trying to figure out, okay, what are consumers interested in, alcohol is a really good way to look into that, because we are definitely seeing a carving out of the middle. People are going, really low end or really high end. So it's, for carriers and shippers kind of planning their year ahead, looking into what's going on in alcohol is a good way to figure out, okay, what should I prioritize, this year?
That's exactly right. The health of the U.S. consumer definitely feeding into freight volumes in every way. Rachel, thanks so much for joining us and amazing coverage on all these indices.
Thanks so much.
Right now, we're going to head back over to the wall because we have Kaylee Nix with our next weather update.
All right, Anthony, thank you for that. Time now for our next check of weather. We're going to start piecing together some of those ingredients for the winter storm that is going to impact the desert Southwest, then eventually bring that chance of severe weather and some icing and some really potential detrimental effects all the way from the southern plains up through the Great Lakes region. So let's move right into sonar critical events. We're going to put the ingredients together. It's kind of like a recipe here. So first things first, we're going to start off down in the Southern California, southwestern Arizona region, where we can already start to see the upper level low pressure system, that circulation starting to form. And this is pretty interesting because this is going to be the real energy source for the storm to come together. So we've got the dynamics there, right? You can see right now this little corner of southwestern Arizona kind of have this counterclockwise spin. That's going to be that upper level low pressure system. And it's in a really favorable spot for development here because not only do you have the dynamics, but now you're starting to pull in some moisture from the Pacific Ocean, from the Sea of Cortez in between Baja California and Mexico. That's going to bring moisture into those dynamics as well. So as the storm moves up to the north-northwest, there's already going to be enough moisture in place to bring that heavy snowfall across Arizona into Colorado and New Mexico once the moisture interacts with that colder air that's up there. Further out to the front, we're also already looking at some moisture being in place across the central parts of Kansas. You can see that on the radar there. Some existing snow developing across the I-70 corridor through the Kansas-Colorado border. And that is going to be impacted and kind of wrap around into the larger circulation as that storm moves up to the north-northeast. Further, because of the way that storm is oriented right now, because of the way that the upper level dynamics are working, as it moves in that direction, it'll pull in this moisture that's coming across from southern Texas and up from the Gulf Coast. That's going to lead to the chance for that severe weather. So we'll have the dynamics in place, we'll have the warmth in place. It's going to be fairly warm across the southern plains these next few days, and we'll have the moisture in place to get that potential severe weather outbreak. Then as the storm moves up to the north-northeast, we've got nice cold air in place across Illinois, Missouri, and up to the Great Lakes, where we'll see some decent snowfall and winter precipitation moving out of it by the time that it gets cold. So those are our ingredients. We're going to be watching it here throughout the next few days. We'll dive a little more into the icing threat and the impacts expected for the central and southern plains up to the Great Lakes later on in the week. That's coming up in our final check of weather. Right now, we're going to take it to a quick break, and we'll be right back. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
From the truckload quoting page within TIE-TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TIE-TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
All right, welcome back to FreightWaves Now. Anthony, of course, we know the amazing offerings here on FreightWaves TV, but we've got a radio presence as well.
That's right, and it's none other but one of the busiest women in logistics, and that's our very own Grace Sharkey, who is hosting that, and that's going to be Drive Time.
Absolutely. So to catch Drive Time, you can hit it up Monday through Friday, 5 to 7 p.m. Road Dog Radio, channel 146 on SiriusXM, and then, of course, they rebroadcast in the evening hours for you late-night drivers, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. This is what's coming up this week on our Road Dog Radio programming, so you can catch Grace during those hours. Monday, she will have Alan Adler and John Kingston talking a little bit about autonomy, a little bit about truck production, and then a little bit about oil and diesel coming out of the both of them. Robert Bain, the strongest man in logistics, is going to be on with Grace on Tuesday. And Wednesday, we've got Mary O'Connell and Craig Strickland from Boxy joining her.
That's right. And to round out the week, we have Mike Baudendistel joining her on Thursday, and we also have Michael Rudolph, our very own, at FreightWaves as well, rounding off the week on Friday. And she is always covering interesting topics, and she's one of those presenters that really, whenever she's talking, I don't feel like, 10 minutes, 30 minutes have gone by.
Absolutely. So, of course, you can hit Grace up by listening to the radio show, always taking callers as well there, and we've got the phone number, which you can go ahead and call into. Make sure that you guys are tuning in for that from 5 to 7 for Drive Time with Grace Sharkey. Remember how Thomas Watson might take over a day or two? It's Thomas Tuesdays typically on Sirius, so you never know what you're going to get out of him. Definitely go ahead and tune in there. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more FreightWaves Now in just a few minutes.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
From the truckload quoting page within TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
It's a good day coming.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for a final check of weather for this morning, continuing to talk about the potential winter storm that's setting up and what those impacts are going to look like across the middle parts of the country. So let's move back into sonar critical events where we still have that radar up and running. Right now we're watching some leading snowfall and mixed precipitation on the cold side, but the front edge of this storm. That's going to be across eastern Colorado into western Kansas. The snow starting to develop across the I-70 corridor through western Kansas. And it's going to kind of be a little bit of a mixed bag here. So because of that, we just have winter storm watches in place across western Kansas and eastern Colorado through that I-70 corridor. Right now, the snow is going to be pretty light and fluffy, maybe mixed in with a little bit of rain. We're not really expecting a ton of accumulations on the roadways. Typically, snow that's like this gets cleared out pretty quickly. And then ahead of that, we've also got some mixed precipitation, but possibly some icing going on across the southern parts of I-70. That's going to be the place where we need to watch out for here for the next maybe few hours or so, is the possibility for ice on those roadways. Not going to be super widespread, maybe just a patchy ice here or there, but still something worth watching as you're driving through Kansas these next few days. Ahead of that, or behind that, I should say, we've got snow starting to develop across the northern parts of Arizona into New Mexico and Colorado. That's going to be the biggest piece of this winter storm, is going to be the snow impacts to the mountains of Colorado and the I-40 corridor between Albuquerque and Flagstaff. So because of that, we've got high wind watches in place along I-40 between Albuquerque and the Arizona border. And then once you cross into Arizona, that winter storm warning does include I-40 from the border up into the Flagstaff area. Snowfall amounts there are going to be pretty heavy as it starts to develop. We could see upwards between 8 to 10 inches along that I-40 corridor. And with that, that snow will be that thicker, heavier, wet snow. So difficult to clear and very difficult to drive through. Couple that with the high winds, could potentially see some blizzard conditions out there as well. So just be super careful if you're running at all along that I-40 corridor these next few days. That does it for weather here today. We'll continue to monitor the developing storm as well as the threat for severe weather as we go throughout the rest of the week. Right now, we'll hand it back over to Isaiah for our final check of the social roundabout.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. My name is Isaiah Buchanan, and we take a look at what's trending on social media. Well, last night was the biggest football game of them all, Super Bowl 57 out in Arizona between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles. And it was the Kansas City Chiefs who emerged victorious. They came out on top 38-35 in a game that came down to the last 2 minutes of the fourth quarter. The Chiefs were driving down the field, and they got a somewhat favorable penalty, which basically set them up to kick a field goal with only about 8 seconds left, which did not leave. This is that field goal right there. Harrison Butker. I mean, it's shorter than a normal PAT, so he had no problem knocking that down. You can see there's 8 seconds left on the clock. So there just really wasn't much for the Eagles to do after that, having only 8 seconds to try to get to it at least field goal range. But congratulations to Patrick Mahomes on his second Super Bowl. Andy Reid, his second Super Bowl with the Chiefs. They won back in 2020 as well. So they're doing pretty good out there in Kansas City. Another really big thing from that night was, of course, Rihanna's halftime performance. She, encapsulated a ton of people on social media. Her performance was actually more popular than the game itself. On Google Trends, she had more than 10 million searches of her name, her halftime show, all of those that kind of fit together. And then the game itself had less than 2 million. So obviously people were pretty impressed with Rihanna's performance. I was as well. Her vocals were amazing. The dancing, but she is pregnant, she announced. So, it's kind of hard to dance when you are pregnant and have a baby growing inside of you. So, Rihanna, congratulations on that, on expecting for your second child. Now, the last thing that I wanted to get into was some of the commercials. Now, this year was, I feel like, kind of a down year for the commercials. There were some good ones. My favorite was Ram's EV commercial. If you didn't see the commercial for their electric vehicle, their truck, you need to go watch it. It has a lot of very funny moments in that one, so make sure you check that out. Then, M&M's, they had their whole falling out after they made changes to some of their spokes candies, and they did Maya Rudolph as their new spokesperson. Well, they're calling M&M's the Ma and Yas now. For Maya, theirs was kind of downhill. Will Ferrell was in a really good one, was GMC and Netflix combined together, where he was bitten by a zombie. He played all these different roles from different Netflix shows, which just had a couple of good laughs. So overall, the commercials weren't the greatest this year, but there were some good ones. Let us know what you think your favorite was down in the comments below. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. But right now, I'm going to toss things back over to Bill Priestley. He's got today's Roundtable.
And welcome into the Roundtable. Bill Priestley here with you. And today we're going to be talking about catching bad actors in freight. And we have a person who might make a living doing that just as well. Matt Leffler, the armchair attorney, joins us from Chicago, Illinois. And I'm imagining that he got plenty of sleep last night because he didn't necessarily have a team that was in the Super Bowl last night there as well. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Remember, I have 2 infants under 3 months old, so to think that I got a good night's sleep is just completely inaccurate.
Point taken, definitely. All right, so big, humongous subject here, catching bad actors. We're talking about double brokering. We're talking about legitimately stealing freight. A number of different ways we can go with this. This topic was basically brought to my attention through the fact that we'd had our freight conversation with Ann Rinke, who said she wanted to have more talk about this particular subject. And then, as we heard earlier today, Ryan Schreiber echoing that and saying we should be doing more to try and stop the illegal activity from happening on both those subjects. We've got a lot to talk about here, but let's first talk about just kind of whose responsibility right now is it to kind of police this? You know, some people say it's a commercial thing, that, you know, the carriers, they need to be going to local law enforcement and they need to be sorting out as far as, you know, stolen freight is concerned. Others are saying, say, for instance, it's a safety issue. Say, for instance, a trailer full of meat goes out of temperature, gets lost, all of a sudden gets sold, causes an outbreak because of contamination. Where do we need to start from an oversight perspective here, Matt?
Well, let's begin by talking about, like, the issue we're talking really about double brokering and where that impacts the industry. So just to give the audience a little bit more information, a double brokering event happens when it's another party who's won the load, gives it to somebody else and doesn't disclose that to the shipper. If you disclose to the shipper, hey, I'm going to be using other resources, we're talking about co-brokering, not illegal at all. When you do a double brokering event, that's when something happens that makes people uncomfortable. The shipper doesn't know who takes custody and control of that freight, and it's not disclosed who takes custody and control. And when that happens, the liability can be, oh, now we have someone, like you mentioned with the meat example, we didn't know what happened during the time that was in the custody and control of an unknown person. But if that second person who gets access to that has brokerage authority, that's probably not going to be illegal under FMCSA. What becomes illegal under the FMCSA is saying you're something that you're not. So you say I'm a broker, but then you say in the load board, oh, I'm a carrier, I can move this, and they just double broker to somebody else. But this is kind of the issue we're really focusing on, is who has the right to move things, and when someone does do something that's against the law, how do you communicate that to the regulatory authorities? The FMCSA has many ways you can communicate with them about potential double brokers. The load boards also have ways to say, hey, we know this entity is a double broker, but it's like whack-a-mole. They disappear and they come back, and that's the big challenge.
Yeah, so let's just look at that from kind of a top level view. Obviously, you know, the FMCSA, the DOT, perhaps don't have the resources at all to try and address this in any sort of form across the board. Ryan Schreiber mentioned an idea where you've got to get people to come together to not necessarily, submit data points together, submit data that could help with the problem, do it in anonymity, and do it so that all the data points could be aggregated to try and look at this from other perspectives. But he also said that there are situations where really nobody wants to talk about this, because then you're basically admitting that you've had issues with it before. So where do we start from that?
What I find really compelling is the technology to solve these problems is in our possession now. So the ability to say to a trailer, like, who has this? Where is it? What's happening with it? This type of IoT has come to the trailer owners and trailer operators. And in that context, it's not just getting pings twice a day. It's getting pings every 4 minutes. So we can tell, for the most part, where a trailer is at any given moment. As to who that truck driver is that's carrying it, there is technologies like Project 44 or 4 Kites that are giving us visibility into this. But the idea of brokers and carriers reporting bad actors, there has to be easier ways to do it. There has to be more incentives to do it. But again, it's really not a FMCSA issue when a shipper's contract with their broker gets violated by a double brokering event. That's simply a commercial problem that has to be dealt with between those two parties.
Does it take on an even added significance if we're talking about, say, for instance, a food product that goes out of temp and goes missing, and then, because I've heard multiple people tell me that this has happened to them, where they've had food that has gone missing and you don't know if it's been contaminated, and here comes an outbreak, and maybe FSMA gets triggered there in the process.
Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful question because, again, it goes back to what you can solve with technology. Right. You can tell on most modern refrigerated units, does it drop below the temperature it's supposed to be at? And the shippers will know because it's their trailer. They know what's kind of happening there. But the idea of if you lose the temperature control and it gets out into the market, and what do? The recall processes are there to say this trailer needs to be moved out from the production floor. But these questions are only going to get more common as we have the difficulties with everybody trying to move freight and as markets continue to decrease in terms of the rates that people are getting paid.
What's the biggest obstacle that is kind of in front of us towards maybe making this less prevalent in freight?
It's a difficult question to solve. That is the biggest issue, is how do you regulate something that is really taking place between private parties? And if you have a big regulatory infrastructure going after all these different brokers and carriers, you would need to increase the FMCSA's budget to do this. And that requires a lot more money. And so we're trying to find solutions that don't require a lot of money. And that's why the FMCSA has been very quiet for the most part on the idea of double brokering. They understand it's an issue, but it's a hard issue to solve. And we have to get all the different stakeholders to come together and say, how are we going to do this? How do you verify that a carrier is going to move it the way they've described? And that's knowing your customer, knowing your vendors, and relying on technologies like Carrier Assure or Carrier 411, whatever different products are out there to help people understand, who am I actually doing business with?
Yeah, that's definitely something you in most cases, you would think you would do a lot of homework, at least a lot of research on that. But then, of course, we're talking about in freight, and you got to get a load, and you got to move it, and you got to do it quickly. All of a sudden, maybe things start to go a little bit faster than they should in that respect. With that, you look at the situation in terms of, let's say, for instance, from the carrier perspective, and in terms of you're saying basically whack-a-mole and trying to get these guys in one way or another. What's the best solution to it that you at least have control over, and then maybe what's the solution that you would like to have that you don't have control over?
The solution I think that we have control over is knowing who you do business with. It's easy to say there's not enough time. It's easy to say we just got to get things moving. But you can put processes and procedures in place that can reduce the risk that you have in that context. In the way of what we don't have is really great visibility on all of the trailers and trucks that are out there. There's these great silos of excellence that have incredible information, but it's not being shared in a really simple way. It's not something that the regulators can hop into and see what's happening in real time. As time goes on, I think these things will be reduced to an extent, but as long as shippers are chasing the cheapest way to move something, you will continue to have these issues. And on the theft side of things, there's technologies you can have that can help show you if something's been opened or broken into, but these things are part and parcel to the movement of goods in the country. And there's not much you can do to stop bad actors if they're wanting to steal something and stop a train or stop a truck and take what they can.
Would you see a situation where the FMCSA or someone at the federal level looks at, like you said, these kind of data silos, which are not necessarily sharing information, and try to incorporate or try and build a resource where that data can be shared anonymously, or at least at a point where it's not at the detriment of the data holder?
It's going to happen, right? It is going to happen. As you see things like level 4 and level 5 automation, the ability for technology to communicate across different jurisdictions and different stakeholders will be something that must happen. The future is very clear. It's connected systems, autonomous vehicles, shared assets, and electrification at some level for the powertrains. So I do think as time goes on, there will be this desire for one set of data to rule them all, one set of data to find them, and one set of data to bring them all, and presumably in the darkness bind them.
Just out of curiosity, from a law perspective, I imagine there are not going to be much legal qualms with someone putting together an exercise like that?
Well, you need the consent of the people that you're going to be sharing the data from. So there's got to be people who are willing to share data. And one of the things we've seen over the last few years is people are more interested in some form of collaboration. And usually they want to collaborate under their terms and not someone else's terms. But the idea that people would have rights to their data and having to share that, that's the big issue. Who can share what and what information can they see when they make that query?
And therefore, the most difficult obstacle perhaps to overcoming this is the good guy?
That's right. It's all of us. I mean, the people who follow the rules will continue to follow the rules, and that's how it's always been. But there are people in the margins who will try whatever they can to take good freight and find ways to profit off it. And double brokering is a problem, is a symptom, really, of a bigger cause of how fractured our supply chain is. And as time goes on, data will make these things become more clear. Sunlight will show people what's happening. But the barriers to make a new brokerage or to make a new carrier are not that hard to cross. And so you'll continue to have entities pop up from time to time. They'll be called out, they'll wind down, they'll make another one. And so we go back to the same challenge. This is why it's important for carriers to know their brokers and to know their shippers, and for shippers to know their brokers and know their carriers. Know the people you work with, and that'll help you ultimately avoid some of the pitfalls we see with double brokering and fraudulent claims.
Matt Leffler, great talking to you. Again, this is a tough subject. We hope the technology comes along. We also hope that public opinion comes along as well. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Matthew Leffler, our armchair attorney from Chicago, joining us. And we will take a short break. We'll come back with more FreightWaves Now after this.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
From the truckload quoting page within TITMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at ti-software.com to find out how TITMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
And welcome back for a final recap of your top stories this morning on FreightWaves.com. Operating results from 4 Asian shipping lines show the companies are suffering from performance declines and ongoing market erosion into this year. OOCL reported revenue of $3.18 billion for the fourth quarter of 2022, down 35% year over year, with volumes down 2.7%. Revenue on Trans-Pacific lanes was one of the main drivers of the steep plunge. Evergreen, Yangming, and Wanhai also saw revenue declines both for the quarter and for the first month of 2023. Yangming reported operating revenues down 22% in January from December. Cummins might not be breaking even on its new power division quite yet, but the forecast is strong for production of hydrogen electrolyzer technology. That tech is crucial to making hydrogen fuel for zero-emissions long-haul trucking. The market for it is forecast to grow over the next decade to $120 billion by 2023. CEO Jennifer Rumsey said that the electrolyzer business is expected to drive the majority of progress towards break-even in 2027 for the new power division, with Cummins projecting $400 million in hydrogen revenue by 2025. And Radiant Logistics has delayed financial reporting again as it continues to work to restate prior results due to issues in timing of revenue recognition for in-transit shipments and those related expenses. The latest extension for the 3PL includes the fiscal 2023 second quarter, which ended for them December 31st. The company has been unable to file annual results for fiscal year 2022, which ended June 30th, and is now 2 years behind on its reporting. Back in November, Radiant had estimated the process to be complete by the end of last year, maintains that the resubmissions will have little net effect on their prior results. And you can find those headlines and more by heading on over to FreightWaves.com or logging into our FreightWaves app. Give us a like and subscribe on YouTube and a follow on social media as well. Of course, head on over to tv.freightwaves.com for anything else. We're going to toss things back over to Tanner and Donnie for one final carrier update.
Thank you, Kaylee. Welcome to our last carrier update of the morning. Donnie, looks like we're going to dive into some individual lanes here.
Yeah, but before we go into individual lanes, we're watching the weather. We're watching what Kaylee's talking about, some of those new snowstorms that are coming across the U.S. Keep in mind, when you're doing spot rates, you can increase your spot rates if it's affected by weather. Normally, people will be turning these loads down. They don't want to cross in and get stuck. So they look for somebody to run the loads, which allows people in the spot market to really run those rates up. That's great, but be careful. If you get stuck in that snow, the amount of money that you ran your rates up may not be enough. So if you do book the loads, you know what? You may want to call them back and maybe try to reschedule them. You don't want to leave Dallas on a Friday, get stuck in New Mexico Saturday and Sunday, and still be late, still have to reschedule. Maybe try to hang out in Dallas and run some local loads over the weekend and pick up those that freight on Monday and then go out to California, wherever you're headed, and you might be a lot better off. But some of these lanes are going to be affected. I-70, I-40, a little bit of I-40 cutting across. So those are some major routes in freight. Everybody thinks they can drive in snow. Yes, they probably can. But sometimes it's the other person that causes the accident. So it's just really not worth it. You're going to wreck your truck. You're going to lose the load, have to file claims, insurance, and you're going to be out of business for a little while because trucks are hard to come. Well, trucks were hard to come by. You're going to have to find a good used one. Those are popping up in the market now. But anyways, let's hop in here to our lanes of the day. So we talked about Harrisburg, PA. Well, I told you Harrisburg's always going up. Well, I chose a lane, Harrisburg to Atlanta. Let's get out of Harrisburg. And as you see here, it's picked up here over the last few weeks here, but it's $2.74 a mile. Pretty good run for a spot rate, but you know, here, remember, do not fill your truck up in Harrisburg. That's some of the highest fuel prices besides California. The Northeast is really kind of competing with the West Coast as well when it comes to the highest fuel prices, mainly because home heating oil competes with diesel number 2. And that's what's driving the rates up in that Midwest area and the Northeast. So 274 going down to Atlanta, hit a little double arrows there, make sure our reefer's turned on. Go ahead and roll over here and go under your display, turn on the large fonts, it looks a lot better. Going Atlanta back to Harrisburg, 272. So really not terribly a bad lane considering our NTI is all the way down to 240 or 245. So we're trying to find those lanes that are above $3 a mile. It's tough. But if we go to the next lane and go Harrisburg up to Boston, a good little 387-mile run, we're looking at rates between 433 and 501, so about 460 a mile average. That's where you can find some of these lanes going to those markets that people don't want to go to. Nobody likes to run the Northeast. That's some of the best paying freight. Yes, fuel's higher, but that's the rates pay a lot better because the population is so dense and they don't want to run in those markets. Hit a little double arrows and flip this around. What are we coming back? You're still coming back at 350, Tanner. And that's not for a backhaul lane, that's not bad. These used to be dollar mile lanes Back in the day when I was trying to get our trucks out of the Northeast, I would be tickled with $1.25 out of Boston getting back to Harrisburg. So these lanes are still paying pretty well. Let's pop over and go over to Chicago. Chicago showed up on our head haul map, so there's a lot more outbound freight in the Chicago market than there is inbound freight for reefer. Seems to be a good market, but again, you also have to remember if you're Chicago and you're surrounded by a bunch of red markets, you might have a lot of people dead heading over into that market to pick up that freight. But we see some pickup here over the last few days from Chicago right out to Kansas City, a 529-mile trip, and you're still getting $320 a mile. So pretty good average on that. Confidence score of 3, so we have a range from about 296 to 337. So if it's same day and things are getting tight, you might be able to get a little bit higher of a rate on this. Hit our double arrows and let's bring it back. Kansas City coming back to Chicago, 319. So still we're over $3 a mile on this lane. Chicago's been a pretty strong market so far, very surprisingly held being a very strong market for both dry van and reefer. So if I was an owner-operator that was trying to run a lot of spot market loads, if I didn't have a lot of contracted freight, or even as a small company, didn't have a lot of contracted freight, I'd be trying to run my trucks out of Chicago.
Awesome. Thank you, Donnie. We'll hand it back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, we are done here for your Monday morning. Hopefully you've got a little bit of recovery from your Super Bowl shenanigans last night. We're glad that you chose to start your morning with us. We'll be here all week.
That's right. And you can't forget, because coming up soon, we're going to have our Super Bowl of virtual events, and that's going to be Global Supply Chain Week. That is a free virtual event, and registering makes you eligible for a free giveaway. We're not done with content here this morning. We're also going to have more content coming up in just a few moments. In about an hour, we're going to have Tim Dooner with What the Truck.
I can't promise that anything else will be as interesting as the halftime show last night, but hey, who knows? Maybe we'll see an Anthony halftime show at Global Supply Chain Week. I don't know. You got to tune in to figure it out. But make sure that you're sticking with us the rest of the day on FreightWaves TV. What the Truck is here in just about an hour. And of course, we'll have the stock out and the drop zone this afternoon as well. Have a great rest of your Monday. We will see you guys tomorrow starting live at 9 a.m. and we'll see you then.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all